Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss again here at allpointstv.com, and we are very glad, elated as a matter of fact, to having you with us this afternoon. We come to you again Monday at 2 o'clock, and the program airs again at WFOV 92.1 on Saturdays at 12 o'clock in the afternoon. And we are always very glad to have them partnering with us here at allpointstv.com.
And also, that goes up on Channel 17, 8:30, 9:30 on Tuesday nights. Your show is in rotation with other shows from All Points TV.
Okay, that's good to know, John. I am very happy to have all of our partners here watching the program because we think we're covering some things that's not covered anywhere else. And I do plan to go over a couple of things that others are saying and try to come behind them and make some corrections on some of the things they're talking about, because what they are saying, some of these experts, what they're saying is constitutionally inaccurate. And I'm going to use the Constitution as a way of driving home the point that I'm right and they're wrong. Because I can't let this insanity stand and what these scholars are talking about. And it's frightening when you think about it, because these people are supposed to be the intellectual leaders of the country at some of the top universities in the world, allegedly, that's true. And they are out here emoting some of the most outrageous nonsense. And it's hard, quite frankly, it's been hard for me to listen to them. Okay, a lot of things have been going on these last couple of days, and I want to start the program out today with this controversy going on in Virginia. Don't forget, Virginia is the home of the capital of these states that have seceded from the Union and set up their own nation and had their own capital in Richmond, Virginia, after the meeting they had in Montgomery, Alabama, and 7 states had gone out and decided that they could do better for themselves and rule and be self-determining outside the country rather than being under the auspices of an all-encompassing federal government. This idea of slavery as the reason why the secession movement would have occurred is nonsense. This is not what this war was about, this so-called Civil War, which is also mislabeled. This was a war of secession where states were exercising their sovereignty rights to undo what they had done at the Constitutional Convention when they decided to come together and create the United States, meaning that each state, 13 in number, each one sovereign, was coming together as the United States and forming the United States of America. But don't forget the part of the United States of America. And we know that to be true by the fact that when they drew up the preamble to the Constitution, it first of all said, "We the states of the United States." But that was later changed to "We the people." So we all talk about some of the things that the experts are talking about, and we will get it right, and they don't have it right. And I'm going to show that through the Constitution that they do not have it right, and they do not understand what they're talking about. And I'm talking about some of these persons at Harvard University that have made some outlandish claims about the impeachment process. And I can tell you right now that they don't understand this process, although they claim to be the experts. But I want to start out today with some things that are happening on the national scene. We've been all watching what's happening in Virginia, where the governor of the state, he couldn't tell which one he was in the he's forgotten now. He has a memory lapse about which one he was in that photo that was on his yearbook page. Was he the one under the sheet, or was he one in blackface? And everyone is outraged by this blackface caricature and calling it racist and so on and so forth. So I wanted to show on the screen, since I don't think this is the crisis everybody else is saying it is, I want to show on the screen some of the other persons that have gone into coloring themselves different from their race and being disguised, where no one thought it was outlandish and saw the humor in it, and no one was was so outraged as out right now about this photo, and I'll tell you why we need to put that in context after we show a couple of examples of the same thing happening where nobody raising eyebrows. I want to show you, for example, the White Chicks. Remember the White Chicks film? That was starring the Wayans brothers, Keenen Ivory Wayans. Look at this. Look at this photograph of the Wayans, and you'll see that they are in. It's a comedy, folks, and nobody's gotten hurt. Nobody's gotten killed. There's no lynching being called for. It's a comedy routine, and if that doesn't prick your nerve as much as the one down in Virginia, then let me show you the other one here. This is the one with Ted Danson. And I want you to notice here, his girlfriend at that time, Whoopi Goldberg, she finds humor in it, and nobody seems to be offended by it, and so on and so forth. I just think we have to put things in the context in which what's the intention of it in terms of the context. I think both the one by the Wayans and also by Ted Danson, I think that the intent was comedic. Okay, and then what about, I'll tell you another one that, what about the one of Ed Koch? Anybody remember that one when Ed Koch, the former mayor of, the late mayor of New York, who put on an Afro wig, and he was joking. He was saying, "I wonder why is it that I all of a sudden feel like going on welfare?" And you can have your sensitivities raised and object to it and be outraged and all of that. We can put things above the pale and make it more important than it actually is. Or we can laugh at it and laugh at ourselves and understand that that was a timepiece. And it's not just that, by the way. We could talk about two books that you might have come across. What about the book written by John Howard Griffin called Black Like Me? Anybody remember the Sepia magazine? It's out of business now, but it was pretty much a competitor to Ebony magazine. And it preceded Essence magazine. So you had Sepia magazine financed John Howard Griffin, a black magazine named Sepia, financed John Howard Griffin. And John Howard Griffin colored his face and went into the South in blackface, this time in order to live as an that movie called Undercover Brother, as an undercover brother to experience the racism in Mississippi at that time, as a quote unquote a person that was black. They were black like me. Of course, I think the book was mislabeled. He could have written it. The title should have been written "Black Like Them," but his title is "Black Like Me," and what he was talking about was he had gone undercover and was looking at racial bigotry from the standpoint of a black person by coloring his face for a period of time, and then wrote it while he was in Mississippi. Wrote it to the magazine to tell them that he was living undercover while going into the South to experience the problems that blacks had faced and so on and so forth. And black people cheered that. And then there's a book out by Grace Hassel you might have missed. It's called Soul Sister. And she had colored her face and lived, quote unquote, for a period of time as a black person, and wrote a book about it and her experiences and so on and so forth. And so nobody was outraged over that. Now we see a photograph of this governor of Virginia, and the outrage is humongous. People calling for him to step down, although this was, 25 years ago. And everyone is outraged. He's not fit to govern. And yet we ought to look at the malfeasance of these politicians in office. They're doing things much more egregious than what they did 20 years ago. Look at the man at the same time they're calling for him to step down because of blackface. Look at the fact this man had called for in that same week for post-birth abortion of children. This man was calling for murder. This was no longer about reproductive rights of the mother. This was a call for, in the aftermath of when a child has left the womb of the mother, they were saying that abortion could take place even at that point. Nobody's outraged over that. Nobody said he's unfit to govern based upon that particular phenomenon.
I heard of conservatives for years who were always anti-abortion. And they were always saying, eventually they're going to say they want to be able to abort the child after it's born. And people are saying, oh, you're really stretching it. You're really exaggerating it. That hyperbole doesn't work. That's this unnecessary rhetoric. Guess what? They're more present than those other people are going to give credit for.
And we don't know what it ends, John. If we could move from the womb to the afterbirth, and we can begin to talk about and justify, as I think 2 states have done right now, and others are seemingly going down the same path, Virginia and New York, and it looks like other states are joining the parade. If we can begin to expand upon what we mean by abortion, and abortion just means to terminate a life already in motion, then where does this lead us? Could lead to a lot of things, up to and including infanticide up to a certain age. We find 3 or 4 years down the line that the child is burdensome and he's crying too much, and we don't like the fact that we have this weight on our shoulders and have to take care of a child now for all these years ahead of him up until maturity. And maturity now is 26 years of age, because we now are being told that we have to keep the children now. We have to keep the children on our insurance up until age 26.
Did you ever see that preview for that movie they had out on? It was like a miniseries on History Channel about the shooting of Tupac and Biggie Small, and they were going to say, how old was Biggie? And he said 25. He said, how old was Tupac? He's 25. He goes, yeah, kids. I went, 25-year-olds are not kids. I know I like to extend in my adolescence to 40, but I just can't see where a 25-year-old can be considered a kid. Yeah. Younger person, yes. Young adult, yes, but certainly an adult. But you're saying 25. That's an adult. That's an adult. That's
the
not
reason
a
that's so stunning to me is because I finished high school at 17. My mom I was skipped over from 4th grade to 6th grade. And so when I came out of high school, I was 17 years old. And I stayed out of college for a half. From high school to college, I stayed out for that half year. I didn't go to college until February of 62. I finished high school in June of 61. But from September to February, which would have been the first semester of college, I didn't attend college right out of high school. I stayed out for a while. I can remember my mom calling my dad up. My mom was in Birmingham. We were living in Birmingham. My dad was in Detroit. And my mom called my dad up, and she said, Reverend, I want you to talk to him. He's out of high school, and put me on the phone with my dad. And my dad wanted to know, what am I going to do? Because I was out of high school, I'm still at home. They could not understand why I'm still at home at 17. Because my mom's idea was she had sweated the problem out over her time of raising her children. She had raised a child from, incubation until after high school, and she wanted me to move out of the household. She considered me to be grown after I finished high school. And so I left home at 17. I went to college in that second semester in February of 1962 and graduated in 3.5 years in 1966. But I never moved back home. And it never even dawned on me that I should move back home. My mom made it very clear that once we finished high school, we should be on our own at that point. And so this idea that you're now on your parents' dole until 26, and you're on their insurance and all of that, that's very vulgar to my understanding. And I think my mom would not tolerate it, as a matter of fact, and I would even begin to try to put that on her, even if it were made legal by these federal merchants of death, that they would declare that burden should be extended based upon they're not providing anything to maintain putting the burden less on my parents than it was. They're going to declare it, but they're not going to do anything to intervene and make it more financially fiducially more reasonable for my parents who are already poor, and I'm going to be a burden after I finish high school and continue to be a burden. That was not what my family thought about it. And when I came out of high school, I understood what my mom was saying. She didn't know what my plans were, though. I was planning on going to college, but I wanted to take a half year to kind of mature more because I was younger than the others. And when I finally entered college, I still was the youngest in my freshman year. So, but I was just trying to get a little bit older to go to college. I guess I should have thought about going right out of high school, but it worked out well. I still finished at 21.
When I was 17, I was in high school. I graduated also when I was 17. My dad used to joke with me. He never really pushed it, but he said, "Yeah, when you get to 18, I'm going to break your plate and sell your bed. You're out of here." No.
Remember that cartoon when they had they were saying to the child got the bags packed and move out of the house, and they were saying, "We're going to miss you," and they all hugging and kissing and all crying. So as soon as the person went off to college, they boarded up the room and painted the walls, all of that. And the idea was that the person's finally out of here. And that was the idea we had up until the time we started to make children. Now we got children up to the age of 26. And what about that one guy that sued his parents because he wanted to live in the household? He's 30-some-odd years old and wants to live in the household. And the parents thought it's about time for this guy to get out of here. This is not even in the 20s. This guy's in his 30s, like 33 years old.
There's that movie that came out a few years ago called Failure to Launch. A guy it was Matthew McConaughey, I think, was the one that played his son, and his parents wanted to get rid of him and stuff, so they hired a specialist to get him out of there. They had a woman that actually went around getting these guys interested in her and inspired to get out of their parents' house so they could be with a dated woman and all this stuff. But it was a great movie because I was like, he had a great life. I mean, he came, and I lived at home for a long time, but I mean, I always had jobs. I always had to work. I had to work at least 30 hours a week,
John, how does a person sue his parents?
I don't know. It's like okay, the very people that gave you the right to the ability to sue them, you're going to sue them. That just doesn't make sense.
I can't see how some of the things that are happening right now. We have got to put a check on some of the things that are happening, and even that discussion out in Virginia, I know that people have their antennas up, and everything that happens right now, somebody's going to be outraged because we want to be offended. We are a country right now that looks for offense. And this governor had done this 20 years ago, and there's no forgiveness, and that's outrageous, and so on and so forth. And nobody can see the other side, the lighter side of it. He has been made that he must now step down from voters voting him in. And at the same time that was happening, what really was interesting to me was at the same time that was happening, there was this other issue that was standing aside of it, and nobody was raising an issue about that. I guess murder, which is what I call, at least in that case, the child is born and you still are talking about abortion, and the child is out of the womb. What do we call that? If you murder somebody and they've already had birth, I mean, if you terminate a life and you've already given birth to the person, how can that be anything other than murder? How are you calling it abortion? And if that's abortion, then at what age does abortion stop? Not that I am buying this idea that that this is about choice, that a woman has the right to choice of somebody else's life, which is what that is about, by the way, the fact that they can still have the choice on determining whether or not the child will be viable or not based upon after birth. Now, I don't know how old that child was. Was out of the mother's womb, so I don't know how old it would be. But at what age do you cut off and say if the child is born that the abortion claims are in fact ended? And if it can go on the outside of the womb, then who's to say that it does end? The mother, I know parents used to tell their children all the time that I brought you into this world and I'll take you out. And we never thought that they would do that. But now I don't know. We're sanctioning a lot of things here that would have been stunning to how we perceived our roles in society in the past. I mean, just even that was 10 years ago, even that would have been abhorrent. But now, not so much. And the question is, what does this lead to? But anyway, everybody's talking about that the governor must step down because he was in blackface or he was wearing a sheet at some point in time. Nobody got lynched.
I'd like to know, actually, that governor of Virginia, can't remember which one he was, the one in blackface or one in the hood, he's basically saying we all look alike anyway. No, that's what he's saying. All white folks look alike. I mean,
yeah.
So I mean, should I get offended by that and demand his resignation or whatever? I think that's absurd.
I understand. It's a lot of things that people do. Some people have a weird sense of humor. And is there anything that is off limits that we should not? You shouldn't be putting a rope around somebody's neck and pulling them up and things of that sort. But in terms of mocking some of the nonsense in the past, and you can't see the other side of it, it's a serious thing that happened. But mocking the people that did that is showing how ridiculous it was.
Look at Jerry Springer's show. A few years ago, a woman who was black was getting disgusted, she said, with other black folks. So she put on a Klan uniform. She was sitting there in a chair on the Jerry Springer show, wearing a Klan uniform. So I mean, I was like I was kind of, wow, why would you do this? Why would you embrace this? This kind of crap. I mean, but Jerry Springer is the lowest. He's the lowest bottom of the.
John, you did a program. That was a program with a person that was once a part of the team here, and he came in. This is a black person, and he came in to make a point. He put a sheet on. Remember that, and was wearing a Klan-like outfit to make a point about that. He wasn't endorsing the Klan, and I don't think they were endorsing the Klan back in that time period. Back in the time period when this future governor, put that sheet on, and it was a way of defaming the Klan, and making a joke out of the fact that these people were serious. But look at how minstrel this was on their part, and so some of it, if you look at it in a larger context, if we can't go back and say that was ridiculous, which I think this is what this was saying, I don't think it was calling for the lynching of any black people in Virginia. And who would call for that in this time period?
Look at Hogan's Heroes. They came out in the 60s, and it was like lampooning the whole Stalag 13 was set, German prison war camp for Luftwaffe and all that, for the German Luftwaffe, for, American prisoners, British and French. One of the men who actually played a character on that, Louis Beau, was played by a guy named Robert Clary. He actually was a French Jew who actually was in a concentration camp. Okay, so I mean, here they're already. This is like only 10, 15 years outside of that, that time era and that time frame, and he was already willing to joke about it, and he wasn't taking that seriously, and he actually experienced it. He actually experienced. It wasn't channeling it. He actually experienced. He lost family members in the camps. So I mean, his ability to remove. That's how you actually defeat. That's how you defeat stuff, is to put it out there and ridicule it. Not sit there and be terrified by a boogeyman that no longer exists or largely diminished. Yeah, that's what I think.
I tell you, when I would be offended by something like that, if it was to mock the pain of those that went through that ordeal, or to deny the horrors of that event. That was horrifying. That was very horrifying what happened during that time period. although I'm more horrified by the fact that the killing of blacks in this country by other blacks outdoes what the Klan did in 1 year. That it took them from 1865 until 1952. My numbers would be different from some of the ones being quoted right now, but nobody's quoting more than 5,000. Okay, we're going to take a break right now. I hear the music starting for the 26-minute mark, and we're going to take a break and come back from the break with WFOV viewers and listeners in 4 minutes. We'll see you on the other side of the break. We're going to continue what we're talking about here at allpointstv.com. If it was to mark the pain of those that suffered during that time period, that's something very different. At the same time, I compare that the horrors of that to the lynching that's going on right now, where no one is horrified. And I consider that to be tied into how no one's horrified down there in Virginia over that particular aspect in terms of this abortion of issue, this murder, as a matter of fact, of a child after the child was born, how that was right aside of this minstrel act of this future governor. And everybody's outraged over that. No one, in fact, they were raising the question about that on one of the programs, and the guys were saying, oh, you're just trying to divert from the real issue. That is the real issue. We're talking about people dying here. And if there was a call for someone to die by someone being under that sheet, that's a problem.
Back in the 90s, you brought up the
But
point.
that's not what they were calling for.
You brought up the point about, the amount of people who are black on black crime in major cities like Newark, Chicago, South Central LA, each and every weekend during the course of the week outstrips anything that the Klan did. As racist they are, we're not denying. I'm not denying it wasn't. They weren't racist. Not denying that. But even the NPR a few years, the 90s, they actually had a thing. If there was if racism was like a medal event, like an Olympic event, who would be the gold medal winner? And actually, it would be and actually, that was a controversial thing. They had to pull that spot because it was a public service announcement, but it made a valid point. It made a valid. If murder is murder and wrong is wrong, how can you totally ignore what's going on currently to go back in the past to try to bring people in the future, the present, saying they're part of that? That's absurd. That's an absurdity.
It is absurd, John, and what we don't have in this case is perspective. The Klan horrors were terrible, but we're doing in the Chicagos, the Philadelphias, the Detroits, the Flints, the Saginaw's, the Baltimores, the Cincinnatis, and all these other urban cities, they're doing that in a year. My numbers of the persons that were lynched in this country by the Democratic Party, by the way, because the Democratic Party created the Ku Klux Klan. And they created the Ku Klux Klan to keep the blacks from going to the polls and voting for Republicans. That's why the Klan was set up. It was a military wing of the Democratic Party. But I don't see anybody who is so outraged over blackface and so outraged over these kinds of things that are frivolous compared to what else is going on. I don't see them having a whole lot of they're not horrified over the fact that we are murdering children in this country. And you can call it, you can have any generic term you want to use for it. You can call it abortion. You can call it choice. You can call it reproductive rights. You can name any of these sidebar. You use any of these sidebar words to deny what is really going on here. But what we have going on is the termination of life, and that is an abrogation of our right to life and to liberty and the pursuit of happiness, which are called inalienable rights. Everyone has a right to their life and the right to have sovereignty over their life. And if we deny that, I haven't heard one person that denies that it denies it retroactively. Not a single person. And I am for choice, by the way, but I want to put choice in the right perspective. The choice is the decision to, in fact, do the act that causes the pregnancy, and to do it with or without the necessary precautions to which life is created. There's a choice to be made there. And so this argument that they're talking about choice, that's the choice. So what are they arguing about? What they're arguing about is the refusal to accept the consequences of the choice. They want to call the refusal to respond in a adult way with the consequences of choice. They want to call that choice. That's not choice.
You know,
that's something different.
There's a guy who compiled this philosophy companion, and he's a professor himself. And he's for his own entry, he actually said he lists as basically what his philosophical outlook is at, and he calls himself a non-consequentialist. So basically, non-consequentialist, which if you look that up in that dictionary means being able to resolve yourself of the action, the consequence of your actions taken. So if this guy's actually saying I'm unrealistic. I'm being unrealistic. I don't want people to have to deal with the consequences of the actions they choose. I mean, I'm just sitting there, I'm reading this, and this guy's supposed to be learned. He compiled this great man. I could show you the book. I don't want to give him undue airplay because he's such an idiot, I think.
Yeah.
And on non-consequentialist, every action, I mean, if you eat a donut, you got consequences.
Consequence to everything that goes on, John.
You drink too much coffee, you're wired for the weekend, the night, right? So everything you do in life has got consequences.
Yes.
And to divorce yourself from that, and to want to remove yourself from that is so unrealistic, it shouldn't even be considered an option,
For every action, you learn this in science class, for every action, there's an opposite reaction. And they would say equal. I don't know if it's always equal, but there's always an opposite reaction. There's always some consequence, whether intended or not, of an action that's taken, and you cannot avoid. That's what Ayn Rand was saying, too, and I'd love to bring, whenever I can, Ayn Rand into our conversation, because I just love the things that Ayn Rand left with us in her absence. Ayn Rand said you can avoid reality, but you cannot avoid the consequence of avoiding reality. So those that avoid reality, since reality is an objective absolute, to avoid reality does not mean that you can avoid the consequence of that avoidance. And so this idea that you are a non-consequentialist, meaning that you can avoid the consequences of decision-making, that has never happened and it never will happen. Because reality is, it does not exist based upon our perceptions of it. So anyway, that's that conversation. But I do think we need to check ourselves in terms of why one was downplayed, which really was the most prominent of the two things, why one was downplayed and the other one made more prominent than it should have been, based on the fact that we're not talking about the termination of life in this case here. The other one, we're talking about terminating life, and we're saying this is a distraction. Terminating life is a distraction, and then wearing some outfit that doesn't hurt anybody, that's done as, obviously these are some jokesters. When you're younger, you do some things you wouldn't do in your adulthood. It's called living long enough and doing things differently in your elderly years. If you're doing the same thing, by the way, in your more adult years that you did in your teen years, you've not grown. There are a lot of people. I said at one of my students' funerals, he had deceased at 18. I said, to comfort the family, I said, there are a lot of people that die at 18, but they're not buried until they're 81, meaning that they have perpetual childhoods. And in this young man's life, this young man had lived a very mature life for those 18 years. This was we lost something very great in this young man, and there was a sense of loss there. But I want the parents to know that he had lived a full life in those 18 years. Some people don't live a full life and they're 81 years of age. They died at 18. They're not buried until 81. But they had perpetual childhoods, and they never grew up. I was an adult at 17. And that's what my mom told me. My mom told me I was an adult at 17. And my mom wanted me out of the house because my childhood was over. My mom looked at my childhood as grades kindergarten to high school. After that, you're an adult. If you get out of high school, you're an adult. And so we just have to put things in perspective, is what I'm saying. And I think when you have life and death issues on the table, and you have a side issue of something that can be looked at as something done in zest, I didn't see on there when they were calling for, let's go out there and lynch some black folks. If something is said is done in zest, and you have a life and death situation, and that takes the precedent over life and death, something is wrong here. And we need to take a long look in the mirror and a deep breath to find out why we went down that road. Why is that a more prominent issue than the issue of this governor, while in office, who has a voice now that is over the entire state, calling for abortion? He calls it abortion. But is a 3-year-old child who is terminated by the parents, is that abortion also? If that's abortion that he was calling for sanctioning, then who's to say at what age does it stop? But everybody was talking about the picture 20 years ago. No one was talking about something that's going on right now in our purview that can be changed right now. And that is a problem. That's a problem. And it's very troublesome that we can upgrade one issue and downgrade the other, and the other one has nothing to do with life and death, only as applies to the past, which cannot be changed. He wasn't calling for any killing in this time period, and I think that's the perspective that was missed by these pundits. Anyway, it's very offensive. I think that the offensive, what was very offensive, was the fact that we have these children being terminated, and that goes against our founding documents. The blessings, we say that in the Declaration of Independence, and we also say it in the preamble to the Constitution. The blessings, the word blessings being capitalized, the blessings of liberty, meaning that our liberties, the blessings of liberty come from our Creator. And therefore, what God has joined together, let no man turn asunder. And that goes as much for wedding vows as that which comes in the aftermath of the wedding. That is the fact that the wedding is to bring forth, maybe not in all cases, but the idea before we got so caught up in a lot of other things we weren't caught up of in the past, we thought of the family as a way of bringing up the children through the family unit. And it had been seen that way for 2,000 years, but not so much now. And so the idea that we're getting into now, some things that are very problematical, and we have better start checking ourselves in terms of why that we need to go back and look at Virginia and try to come away with a greater understanding of why we would, in fact, place a minstrel act based on some things that went on in the past that they were mocking in this situation, but not happening now. Nobody can go on a sheet today and ride down and come down the middle of the street. Nobody in the white community or the black community would tolerate it. They would not tolerate. And you could see some of the outcry by the fact that this was a picture of 20 years ago, and look at the outcry just based upon that. Okay, we're not going to stay on this for the whole hour. I wanted to just say that the society has got to get a hold, get a clue about where we're heading, because we're going down some dangerous roads right now. And this could be very problematical for us as a society. What kind of society are we going to live in? And right now, I don't know if we have an answer to that, but But some of the things that happen right now, I don't think we could even have imagined them. When I was coming up, we didn't have anyone that was saying out here that we ought to legalize. I don't think we had anybody talking about we ought to legalize the killing of children. Not saying it didn't go on, but to have the state to come in and sanction the death of its members when it's called upon to protect the sanctity of life, when the state gets involved in it and does not carry out its primary role to protect the sanctity of life or to protect the inalienable rights that were declared to exist in the Declaration of Independence, then that's a problem for that society. And we have got to get a handle on where we're heading and the implications of what we're doing right now. Okay, I want to talk about something very different from that, but that's kind of like was something that was primary. I want to know if anyone, if any of you that are listening, watched this tremendous man, very impressive. That's the Attorney General, the acting Attorney General of the United States. And he will be acting until William Barr will be confirmed. And he will be confirmed probably before this month is out. But the committee, the House, the Senate committee, by a 12-10 vote, voted to recommend Barr's confirmation in the Senate. So that's already passed by a 12-10 vote. They voted by party lines, 12 of the Republicans on the committee and 10 of the Democrats voted in opposite directions, as was to be expected. They voted party line. So by a 12-10 vote, it's now been referred out to the Senate, and because there are 53 members of the Republican Party and 47 non-Republicans, I say non-Republicans because of the 43, one of them is in fact independent. So 53 and 47, it's pretty much assured that William Barr would be confirmed. But I was watching the hearing last week. I was getting a lot of enjoyment talking about humor. I was enjoying the humor of Matthew Whitaker, who did a tremendous job being called before the House Judiciary Committee, basically because, as the one guy said, Douglas Collins, who is from Georgia, the representative from Georgia, the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee, in his opening statement said, the reason why they've told Whitaker, the reason why they call you here is because they wanted a piece of you. He was talking about how these persons they have these bogus hearings. And so Douglas Collins, who's the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee, was calling into question the legitimacy of the hearing. But be that as it may, Matthew Whitaker did a marvelous job of defending his position in that hearing, and also making a mockery of it in the sense that he was showing that it was not to be taken seriously. For example, when these committees are set up, the way it's set up is that you have the majority party being the chairpersons of the committees is always the majority party whose member chairs the committee. And then the ranking member would be the ranking member on that particular committee of the minority party. So Gerald, let's see, from New York, Gerald, what's his last name? I'll think of it in just a minute. Anyway, he was, Nadler, Gerald Nadler from New York, representing Nadler, Nadler. Gerald Nadler, call him Jerry Nadler, was making his opening statement. And after he made his opening statement, he was the first one to, when they came back, to question Matthew Whitaker. And Matthew Whitaker said to him that, I think your 5 minutes is up. I mean, because, if you understand what's going on there, he was actually saying that this is a kangaroo, hearing. And so he's telling the chairperson of the committee his time was up, which was, you get 5 minutes. They asked in 5-minute intervals. And so that was the first part. And then when it came down to Jackson Lee from Texas, he told her that I don't know if your time has been restored. And she holds up the Constitution. And she says to him, Mr. Whitaker, this is a serious hearing, and we're called to have this hearing, and she's holding the Constitution up, based upon the Constitution of the United States, which she can't even understand.
Are those hearings actually outlined in the Constitution? I don't believe they are they?
The House of Representatives is set up in Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution. So the House of Representatives set up in Article 1, Section 2. The Senate is set up in Article 1, Section 3. Being set up, then the skeletons of that setup is for the members of the House to then do. In other words, it doesn't delegate that you'll have a House you have in the House a Judiciary Committee. It doesn't become that specific. But by being set up, the House then has the right under Article 1, Section 2, Clause 5 to choose a speaker and obviously then to set up its own committees. So those committees are set up. It's not mandated by the Constitution, but it would be assumed and implied they have the authority to set up committees in order for the House to function. And the same thing is true of the Senate. In fact, the committees in the House mimic the committees in the Senate. You have the House Judiciary Committee. You have the Senate Judiciary Committee. You have the House Ways and Means Committee. You see, you would duplicate it in you would have not the House Ways and Means Committee because that's a financial committee, and only the House can set up the finance. Only the House can introduce financial bills. But if you have a committee in the House, they pretty much mimic the same House, whatever's in the House, they mimic the same thing in the Senate. So they set it up because there's a need for these committees to function if the Senate is going to carry out its constitutional responsibility that's under Article 1, Section 2 and Article 1, Section 3 of the Constitution of the United States. Are the committees themselves assigned in the Constitution? The answer is no. But you would assume that the division into committees allows the Senate to do its job. Therefore, it is kind of like implied that they have the right in order to do that, although it's not specifically spelled out. I will make I'll make an allusion to that in terms of something went on that committee with Whitaker, because Ted Lieu, who is from the 33rd District in California, was asking some very interesting questions that showed the intent, the mindset in back of why Whitaker was there, because Whitaker's only going to be there another so many days, because once the confirmation of William Barr takes place, then Whitaker will step down since he's only the acting Attorney General of the United States. He's not been installed as the Attorney General. But Ted Lieu was asking some very interesting questions which showed the intent of that committee in the hearings. He asked him, Mr. Whitaker, is there anything in the Constitution, holding up the Constitution again, as if they understand it? And let me go back to Lee for a minute, Jackson Lee for a minute. She held the Constitution up herself and acted like she understands it, when she had said in 2014 the Constitution was 400 years old. The Constitution was ratified in 1788. You count the years up.
He's a Democrat. They have a hard time counting, especially for budgets and stuff like that.
It is. It's as if they understand it. Well, Lieu was asking, in the same line, he was holding the Constitution up, and he was asking to Whitaker, Mr. Whitaker, does the Constitution say, is there any line in the Constitution that says that a president cannot be indicted? A sitting president cannot be indicted. Is there a line in here that says that the president's children cannot be indicted, which tells us a lot about where they're going and what these hearings are about, and how they're foaming at the mouth just waiting for Mueller's report, which I think they're going to be very disappointed when Mueller makes his report, because Mueller was supposed to be investigating collusion, and there was no collusion. Hillary Clinton lost, and they don't want to accept it. And they're now trying to run a coup on the election results of 2016 because they have yet 2 years later to accept those results. This is an underhanded way of trying to overturn this election by raising an issue or non-issue and trying to act as if that is what they're trying to get resolved. Did Russia have an undue effect upon the election outcome of in Americans' political in our politics in this country, and therefore it would have abdicated the responsibility of the voters to install their own officers in power, and Russia, in fact, caused that. That's what they're trying to argue. And that's as ridiculous, as insane as anything else that they're doing. Hillary Clinton lost the election because 63 million people who did not tell the pollsters how they were going to vote, misled them when they did their polling, and made them believe they were giving them their honest desires to go to the polls and vote. And when they went there and voted otherwise than what the polls indicated, they wanted to act as if then that was the Russian influence, other than people going to the polls and voting behind closed doors and with the curtain drawn in private and making a verdict that no one else could, in fact, stand outside their house, for example, as they're doing when they find out that you're wearing, or barring you from going to the restaurant if you're wearing the MAGA hat. So they didn't tell the pollsters everything that they intended to do. They were telling them something very different from that. But there were a lot of people that were looking at, like in Florida, for example, looking at those Donald Trump signs out there in their front yards, and they were saying, wait a minute, whoa, what the polls are saying, a 10-point lead of Hillary Clinton, maybe not. These signs out here in these yards indicate something else that's going on. And those that were behind the masks, they weren't saying one way or another, but there were some other people who had signs in the yards, and there were a lot of Trump signs out there. I guess they were the ones that were not intimidated. And when the polls came out and showed that this is going to be a massacre, and we believed, many people believed the polls were indicative of the fact that Donald Trump had no shot up until November the 8th. And then you begin to see the returns. Wolf Blitzer. Florida has just not been declared for Donald Trump. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin is now just called, one after the other. And you saw the horror on their faces. They were stunned by it. But the American people went to the polls and they voted Donald Trump as president of the United States because that was their choice in the matter. And they're trying to undo that choice. So Ted Lieu did his question is very interesting. Is there anything in the Constitution, Mr. Whitaker, holding up the Constitution as if he understands it, and even acting as if he's read it? And if he read it, can he understand it? Is there anything in here that says the president cannot be indicted? Well, Mr. Lieu, as a matter of fact, there is. And if you had understood the Constitution, you would not have asked that question. And maybe you need to go not only to read the Constitution, but take a math class. Because we have I have three fingers up here, and you can count them. 1, 2, 3. There are three fingers up here. There are three co-equal branches of government. Do you know what that means? It means that each branch of government has 1/3 of the power, 33 1/3 if you want to say it more exactly, 33 1/3 of the power that's invested in each of the three branches of government. Article 1 invests 1/3 of the power in a co-equal branch of government, co-equal to the other two branches. 1/3 of that is invested in the legislative branch in Article 1. In Article 2, 1/3 of the power in the federal government is invested in the executive branch of government. And the last third of it is invested in the judicial branch of government in Article 3. No 1/3, Mr. Ted Lieu, who's over the 33rd District in California, no 1/3 can dictate to the other 1/3. In fact, how do you expect that? How do you think that would happen? That co-equal branches can dictate to each other? The President of the United States cannot be indicted. Indicted by whom? Indicted by the legislative branch? How would that go on when they are co-equal to the president? In other words, the question is profoundly stupid. And this is just another time they come from behind their mask to show their ignorance. No person to understand this Constitution would have asked that question. And no person that understands the impeachment process would make the statements that Alan Dershowitz has made. I wrote down some of his comments. Oh my goodness, we're running out of time. Alan Dershowitz says, no impeachment offense against Trump. Much of the complaints have nothing to do with criminal conduct. He said collaborating, for example, if he did that with the Russians, it's bad behavior, but it's not criminal. And so that's not impeachable. Let me tell Mr. Dershowitz something very quickly as we close out the program today. You don't have to have impeachment only for crimes. You know, I come here every week to the studio to go through the impeachment process. And I never get around to it, but next week I'm gonna start out with the impeachment process because I want to show you that Alan Dershowitz, and also I thought that he was just one of the few out there saying this from Harvard, but Cass Sunstein is also saying the same thing. He's wrong too, and this man wrote a book 20 years ago about impeachment. He's wrong also. So next week, I promise you what I'm going to do. I'll start out talking about the impeachment process, and I guarantee you that I'm going to set the record straight. It's not straight right now, but what they're talking about because they're wrong. Okay, I got to get out of here. I've overran my time. Overstayed my welcome. I want you to follow your dream. Until next week, I want you to follow your dream. If you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.